So a lot of people struggle with the idea of how can God be a good God, but also what about the evil and suffering in our world? How do you reconcile the two? So maybe to put a finer point on the question, does the existence of evil and suffering disprove the existence of God?
It's one of the greatest questions, and many of us have had that question, or we've been asked that as a believer. And I remember a time in my faith, Larry, to where, when I encountered questions like this, I felt paralyzed. I don't know if you've ever been there. Maybe some of us, that's where we are. We want to speak and help people know that Jesus is good and that he's real and true and that he's alive. But some of these questions can be so intimidating that I wanted to know for myself, and I wanted to be able to explain that to other people. So what I'm going to try to do, and I actually brought a couple of books, and those of you who know me well are not surprised. I have 2 books. I have limited it to 2 books here that I'd like to read a couple of selections from, and Larry's trying to hold in his laughter. Our team routinely gives me a hard time about books and the amount thereof. So, but with that, it's helpful for us to understand the popular question of if God is all good and all powerful, and there's evil in the world, and therefore God can't be all good or all powerful. That question is called the logical problem of evil, is basically a dead question on the academic level. That question has been answered definitively, and I'd like to recommend a book. Now, for some of you, you love this stuff, and for some of you, if you have issues sleeping, this may help with that. It was written by a Christian philosopher in 1974 by the name of Alvin Plantinga. It's called God, Freedom, and Evil. And he has this incredible, Larry, statement on page 11 here. Here's what he says. To make out his case, therefore the, right, big word, a theologian or the atheist cannot rest content with asking embarrassing questions to which the theist, those of us who believe in God, does not know the answer. He must do more. He might try, for example, to show that it is impossible or anyhow unlikely that God should have a reason for permitting evil. So what Plantinga is saying is that we can't just, or the person who is not yet a believer in God, posit the question in an embarrassing way. What you have to prove for the logical problem of evil to actually be a problem and a contradiction is you have to prove that there's a logical contradiction between God and evil. Recently, most atheists have gone away from the problem of evil, and it's more what they call the probabilistic problem of evil. They say, well, we can't absolutely prove that God and evil are absolutely incompatible, but it's almost certainly true that God does not exist given the pain and suffering in the world. And we're going to tackle more of that as the weeks go on in our series. But as far as there being an incompatibility between the love and the power of God and evil in the world, you have to actually show that there could not be a way for God to allow there to be human choice and for there to be evil in the world and there not be a greater good come from that. So basically, in a nutshell, is you basically have to have total, complete knowledge to make that total, complete claim to say God cannot exist because of those things. So you truly have to be a know-it-all in a sense.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Tell us again the name of the author in the book, would you, for that? So people can know about that.
Alvin Plantinga. And it's called God, Freedom, and Evil. Just a short little book, but this revolutionized the philosophical world, Christian philosophy and secular philosophy for many, many years, to the point that the logical problem of evil against the existence of God is basically dead on the academic university level. Although we still see it in social media posts and popular news interviews when bad things happen, or on popular level blogs. But for those who have thought through the issue, it's basically a failed case to try to take down the existence of God.
Let me bring up something else. A favorite author of a lot of ours, yours, mine, a lot of people who come to our church all over the world, really, C.S. Lewis. And what a lot of people may not realize is that C.S. Lewis used to be an atheist. And then he became a theist, believed in God, and then he became a follower of Christ. He believed that that God that existed was the God of the Bible. He did some writing and made some comments about his journey from atheism to theism. And interestingly, this very argument that a lot of people use to say, this is why I don't believe in God, it's because of the existence of evil and suffering. As C.S. Lewis thought it through, he actually realized that is a good reason, a great reason to believe in God. Mm-hmm. So really turn that whole thing upside down on its head. Yeah. And in Mere Christianity, I wanted to share a quote and kind of get you to kind of explain this a little bit or develop the thought further for us. So remember now, C.S. Lewis said he couldn't consider the claims of Christ because of the existence of evil and suffering. But then he wrote this: "My argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has an idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust?" Can you develop that a little bit for us, Pastor Jeff? What a great thought that is. And what a great analogy comparing it to the crooked line and a straight line.
Yeah, and Lewis is just a writer, right? Like an incredible writer. And Larry, you've taught a lot on Lewis. And you guys, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to let this out of the bag, but Dr. Starkey is working on a book on critical thinking. So this is just extra incentive that we can't wait till that book is finished, teaching us how to more critically think as people and especially as Christians. So I look forward to when that comes out. And I'm going to try to give this a shot, but I want to hear what you have to say about it.
Okay.
With Lewis's point about a crooked line, how do you know what a crooked line is? You have to know that it's a deviation from a straight line, that the whole idea of evil is a deviation from a standard, right? For something to be bad, it means therefore it's not good. It's not as it should be. And I love what you said about the existence of evil is actually an argument for God because it is the deviation of a standard. Yeah, it lets us know in our hearts and in our observations that things are not as they should be. And so there's a standard there. And then the next question would be, well, how do you establish a standard? Yeah. Where does that come from? And if there is not an objective standard that comes from the nature of the Creator that is good, you're really left with a tough time. Sure. I think. Yeah. Trying to come up with any type of actual standard for ultimate right and wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking along these lines, if you're walking in your yard, you're walking outside and you find a stick on the ground and you pick it up and that stick is crooked, like my arm here represents the stick, right? How do you know that that stick is crooked? You know that it's crooked because when you compare it with that which is perfectly straight, like let's say you have a ruler or a yardstick at home, that's how you know this is crooked because it doesn't match the standard, right? But let me ask you a question. If the perfectly straight standard didn't exist, okay, there is no perfectly straight ruler, no perfectly straight standard, would you know that that was crooked? No. Why? Because you don't have anything to compare it with, right? So you know it's crooked because it doesn't match the perfect standard. Similarly, this represents evil. The atheist and all of us would probably agree that this is in and of itself, evil and suffering are bad, but how do you know it's bad? Unless you compare it with that which is perfectly good. So that which is perfectly good has to first exist so we can call something like evil and suffering bad. Well, that which is perfectly straight, that which is perfectly good has a name, and his name is God. He's the God of the Bible, and all through Scripture we find that God is described as perfectly upright. So the point is to say, for an atheist to say that, or anybody to say that evil and suffering are bad, it assumes that there's a good standard that has to exist first of all, and the only good standard has to be God. By the way, somebody might argue, well, that doesn't mean that God is the perfect standard. How about if we decide what the perfect standard is? Well, a couple of problems with that. Number one, we're never going to agree, all of us, on what's good and what's bad. We'll agree on a lot of things, but not on every single thing. And then secondly, who's to say your opinion of what's good and what's bad is any more valuable than my opinion or anybody else's opinion of what's good and what's bad? So really you're left with the only possibility for there to be an ultimate objective, good, perfectly straight standard would be God. So again, ironically, the atheist has to assume the existence of God in order to argue against the existence of God. So
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis said it much better than that, much clearer.
No,
but that's the thing about the crooked line. How do you
Right.
know it's crooked? Because the straight has to exist first. And when he realized that, that began his transition from atheism, there is no God, to there has to be a God. And then further his thoughts developed, and the Lord worked in his heart to where he realized that God is the God of the Bible.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, click the subscribe button to get the latest content.